The First World War broke out in 1914 and ended in 1918. It is known as the World War because it involved millions of soldiers, women and children from many states all around the world. It was completely different from the wars fought before it. New, more powerful and modern weapons were used, large fortifications and long trenches were built. The First World War brought great changes for people, but also for the environment. This is why it is also called the Great War. At the time, Trentino was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and was bordered by the Kingdom of Italy. When the war broke out, men from Trentino left for the Russian front in Austrian uniform. The Austro-Hungarian Empire had begun to fortify Trentino before the war. Forts, trenches and military roads were built along the border. In 1915, Italy declared war on Austria-Hungary. Trentino became a battlefield. The forts were enormous buildings. Many workers were needed to build them and a lot of money. They had rooms for food, ammunition and water storage. They were supplied with electricity. They communicated with each other by telephone and optical links. The soldiers' greatest fear was to become trapped during the bombing. The soldiers lived and fought in the trenches, long ditches dug in the ground. To protect the trenches, they used barbed wire fences. Life was very hard and dangerous. They were continuously exposed to enemy fire. In summer, they suffered from heat. It was freezing in the winter. The soldiers could not wash. They often lived in the mud with rats and lice. The assault was the most dangerous moment. When the order arrived, the soldiers had to get out of the trench fast, cross the no man's land, and conquer the enemy positions. They had helmets, gas masks, rifles, bayonets, wire cutters, small spades, and hand grenades. Many were shot down by the enemy's rifles and machine guns. The artillery fired continuously. For the first time, the soldiers fought in the highest mountains of Trentino, on the glaciers and the snow of the Otlas, Cevedale, Adamello and Marmolada ranges. The cold, snow and avalanches were the primary enemies in the conflict known as the White War. Huts were built on the mountains and tunnels were dug into the rock and ice. Cableways, mules and dogs were used for transporting goods, but a great number of soldiers, women, children and prisoners were also used. Behind the front line there were kitchens, huts and warehouses. From here, food and ammunition were taken to the soldiers in the trenches every day. There were also military hospitals hidden from the enemy. During the war, there were numerous wounded and sick. Nearly 10 million soldiers died. The fallen of Trentino numbered more than 11,500. In this war, millions of soldiers were taken prisoner. They were taken to camps where they suffered from the cold, hunger and disease. Many were put to work. In Trentino, Russian and Serbian prisoners built roads, paths and cabins. The war also affected villages and towns. Women, children and the elderly were forced to flee from their homes to seek a safe place. There were more than 130 refugees from Trentino. They had to leave suddenly, taking only a few things with them. A lot of them went to distant places and lived in large areas of huts, the wooden towns. At the end of the war, the refugees returned home to find their houses destroyed and their fields and forests burnt. In addition to the ruins, there was a pain of the numerous deaths and the memory of the suffering they had endured. Trentino became part of Italy. It was a long time before life returned to normal. Today in Trentino, 100 years later, there are still many traces of this war. Trenches, forts, the ruins of huts, and military posts. After the war, a great number of items which had remained in the battlefields were collected by recoverers to be reused or sold. Many, however, have been preserved, and now we can find them on display in museums. Come and see them.